Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories. This is episode 30. Let the nightmare begin. The Marshlands. The soggy heathland hugged itself underneath a dome sky. Tracts of mire lay sunken in some places, valleys of soft earth unable to withstand the oppressive atmosphere above it. Other acres were crumpled against the high rock beneath them, dry and tender grass creased by an icy warm wind, which seemed, rather than broaden the vast plain, to make it like a ventless room. The fetid smell of peat wafted through dead reeds. The land whispered fearful things. 1,000 hushed voices hissed perilously. There always hung the suspicion that someone, no more than an outline lost in the myriad of earthy drifts, stood and watched you. On a low ridge of one of those nameless slopes, risen like a crude and alien mausoleum, was a miniature cottage. The house was preserved by walls of ancient rotwood. The original tenants had been aged and humble, with gnarled hands and thick woolen cloth draped over their figures. Whatever possessed them to look over that landscape and find home is now decades gone. Perhaps they were wanderers whose brittle legs and loose flesh were no longer enough to carry them out of that squalid and barren land. They collapsed down onto the earth, trapped by the same force that shaped and depressed the ground itself. In a house that remained since those wretched souls expired, behind a pane of glass that ran thicker at the bottom from age, stood a woman. She was tall and swaying, a figure leaning towards the window, clutching at her elbows, as though willing to press through it and out into the decaying countryside. She was dressed in a thin woolen cardigan and a long starched dress with faded floral print. The wispy rain tattered against the window, spotting her face with silhouettes. She stared without seeing, while her lips pressed together absent-mindedly, or maybe from a mind that could not bear to be present. Her hooded eyelids fluttered, and she hardly breathed. "Come away from the window, Clara." She didn't move, only held herself away from him, as the rain drummed quietly. "You know where we are, don't you?" she said. "It doesn't matter where we are, because we are officially on the radar," Victor enunciated carefully. He was bent over a map at the table, measuring a distance between two fingers. The gas lantern above him hung motionlessly from the weak ceiling panels. "That sounds awfully dramatic." She couldn't keep a note of contempt out of her voice. He looked up suddenly, his handsome eyes now lightless. "It's the fucking truth. Who cares how dramatic it sounds? This is going to land on our doorstep if we're not careful." Clara shut her eyes. The room was deathly still. Victor looked back down. "You have thought about what might happen to us if we're caught, haven't you? Who's going to find out? The railway station is full of cameras. They've already put us there. It's just a matter of whether or not they have a clear picture of your face." Her hand ran unconsciously to her mouth. "I'm trying to fix this. You're doing nothing now. That's what you're doing." His hands were spread wide over the table, standing at the window like an ugly mannequin. His face became acerbic, suspicious. "And what is it you're trying to fix, exactly? It can't be you're worried about covering our tracks, can it? No, you would never be so careless if you gave a shit about us. What I think." He lowered his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Is it you're looking for a way out of this, completely?" Clara looked out of the window across the sodden field, and she saw them. 3 of them, through the soil and filth of Saddleworth Moor. 3 small bodies, encased in earth in varying stages of petrification. 2 boys and a girl. She felt wasted then. The worst part, she thought, was that this was the best she could wish for them. She couldn't help wondering if they had ever been well. It was a silly thing to wonder, but it's difficult when all you've seen of someone is the thrill of panic, of mortal agony, and finally, withering soul, to imagine that they've ever been happy. Their lives, it seemed to her, were only miserable, forced marches to an acute and consuming end. Clara had found a wrinkled copy of a children's book in Ethan's backpack. after Victor had strangled him on the side of the road. It was titled The Swish of the Curtain. It was about a group of children, each with a unique talent, who band together to form a theater group. She remembered her mother reading the same book to her. The night they killed him, she went home to her parents' house. She knocked on the door, her fingers involuntarily wiping at her clammy palms. They didn't have time to react as she moved swiftly through the doorway to the stairs, taking them two at a time. "No phone call, no what?" Her mother burst out. "Who do you think you are to kick in the door like?" But she didn't hear them. She held her coat close around her as she climbed to the top of the stairs and swept down the hall past her sister Lauren's old room, which also stood empty after Lauren had left for college. She flicked on the light in her bedroom and felt a pang when she saw the walls. Once covered with tacked-up posters and shreds of paper on which she had written lines of poetry, they were stripped bare. The room was nothing, an ugly, desecrated ground. Her father was bounding up the stairs after her, blustering deafeningly. "You turned your back on us again? This isn't your house, Clara. Hetty, get the phone, I want to call the police." She turned to her closet and flung the door open. In it were several worn cardboard boxes, some nearly bursting with Claire's childhood clothes, toys, dolls. She yanked down one, which seemed to be full of books. It toppled from the shelf over her, crashing to the floor and spilling its contents. She threw herself down and pulled books from the box, flipping them over to scan the covers. Looking, "Bitch girl." Her father was standing behind her, bearing down. Clara continued to look how to find it. As she upturned the box, the rest of the storybooks spilled out. She saw one which looked like powerful hands closed under her arms, yanked her up before she could find her footing. "Want you out," he breathed into her ear. "Mama," she screamed, dangling. "Mama, help me. I have to find it." But her mother was downstairs, contemplating actually dialing for the police. Tall as Clara was, her slight build was useless against her father's stout, thick body. He dragged her down the steps, yanking each time she grabbed the railing, pulling her across the foyer to the door and out into the yard. There he let go of her, and she collapsed to the lawn, sobbing, hacking. "You get this straight, you..." He huffed at her, again on the ground. "I don't want to see you on our property ever again. We told you, if you leave with him, you won't be welcome back." He grasped his chest. "You destroyed her when you left. And for what? Some treacherous piece of rubbish." Clara continued to moan, face down, breathing in the grassy smell of the lawn. "I don't know where we went wrong, Clara," he said, eyeing her, "but we don't want you here any longer." She stared through the window, unaware of Victor's growing tension. Tears began to burn under her eyelids. They spilled out and over the dark bags under her eyes, through the minute channels of her ashen face. Though her back was to him, Victor understood. He tensed his jaw. "Don't play guilty conscience now, Clara. You knew what you were doing. I never forced your hand. You could have stopped before we brought the Reed girl out here. But you didn't. You forfeited your life." He concealed a smile. A hot pulse beat in his wrists, filling him with a kind of neutral energy, one which might yield an intense elation or a fierce madness. "As far as anyone is concerned," he continued, "you're as guilty as I am. Nobody's going to care that you didn't kill them yourself. You were here, you saw it, and you said nothing. There are no tradebacks this time, Clara. You're here now, and you've got to..." "To what?" she screamed, wheeling around. "What have I got to do?" "Stay here with you, Victor, while the country's in an uproar, while the police are searching for us and no one else, while we keep taking people's children, while..." She realized she was leaning towards him, pointing at him with her teeth bared, but it was too late. Victor rounded the table, seamlessly pulling a knife from his belt loop. The shrill terror of his form pounding towards her made her heart quiver convulsively. Before she could flinch away, he had a fistful of her hair. "Ah," she gasped. Bending her head backwards, he laid the blade across her face, his coal-black eyes boring into hers from their deep sockets. "I promise you," he said, trembling, "if you ever speak to me in that way again, I will cut the tongue out of your mouth." The knife point twitched. "That I have not killed you already is a blessing, he swallowed, that you would do best never to overlook." She cried through her closed lips. The world in front of her began to blur. Her vision closed in on her in a haze of gray. All she could see was Victor's semi-silhouette in front of the lantern. If his eyes flickered, "I so much as dreamed that you were considering going to the police, or to anyone." And he was whispering now, "I will make no attempts to cover up what we've done. What I will do is I will find you and kill you the same way we killed them." She could see his front teeth glittering as his upper lip rose savagely. As though to illustrate the point, he brought the edge of the knife over her Adam's apple and pulled. Light though it was, she felt a burning sensation which told her he had decided to make good on his threat now. His hand cupped over her mouth as she screamed. Her muffled scream reverberated around the cabin. It continued, however, for a second longer than it ought to have. Clara and Victor froze, their eyes brought up to meet one another's. From the shabby bathroom attachment came a shrill, fitful noise. It halted and resumed unevenly, coupled with a low, erratic thumping, as though against hollow porcelain. Victor released her suddenly and strode to the bathroom door. He opened it and peered inside. He stared fixed for a moment, then shut the door and looked back at Clara, pressed up against the glass. His eyes were those of a sedated man. He grinned at Clara, whose throat was so tight it pinched when she swallowed. Her heart spasmed madly inside her chest. "She isn't finished yet," he said gently. Clara's skin stretched taut over her spine. She fell back against the wall, her arms pinned by her sides and her fingers clenching. Hot nausea spread through her bowels, threatening to bring up caustic acids. She shut her eyes, willing it down, allowing it, instead, to brand ulcers into the sides of her stomach. They stood against opposite walls, gazing at each other. Victor's smile grew, then faltered as his eyes clouded. He appeared as though he were having some sudden revelation. Clara waited, holding her breath. She stared at him, wishing madly for something to happen, but not being able to think of what that something was. She had the sick feeling of being told to put her hand in the curtain box and guess what lay coiled within. Looking at her again, Victor slowly turned the knife over in his hand, gripping the blade so it faced handle out towards her. He said nothing. Clara's thoughts seemed to fragment. Something in her brain seemed to ignite, like a huge and complex engine had fired into life. It revolved, whirring faster and faster, as though a cog had come loose from the greater clockwork and spun freely. Victor looked patiently back. Her heart pumped so hard into the vessels it became painful. Her head and body throbbed in different tempos, becoming discordant, producing in her a sour feeling akin to that of poison. The protective faculties of her mind tried to shield her, to find some alternative, any alternative to what Victor was about to make her do. They burned out in the process. Every unconscious measure penetrated by the magnitude of what was about to happen to her, what she was about to make happen to... The cog slipped off its gear. It fell out of sight, out of reach. The engine ebbed, waned, and died. Clara's face slackened, her eyes unfocused, sending the room into a soup of borderless colors. Hate and fear and dread, ripping through her moments before, now drifted formlessly over its surface. Like drops of dye in water, they dissipated into gossamer furls that slowly spread into nothingness. She saw that she was no longer anywhere but in a room. Across from her was the figure of a man who held something small in his hand. He seemed to want her to take it. She did not quite know what this man wanted with her, but she knew what he was. He was a spinning void. He was a brilliant sun, eclipsed by a mortal shape. In him, though, she saw glistening malevolence bubbling on the surface of that blinding star. It churned throughout, a liquid composite of two elements that mingled but dared not mix. She was alone with a demigod. He was perhaps as old as the ash from which man arose, and he possessed within him power, so sovereign gravity itself seemed to bend toward him. Indeed, she felt herself drawn to him by a force she could not quite convince herself was her own. She looked at him, and the venom that laced itself around him began to subside. She glimpsed a benevolence so absolute she would have liked to drown herself in it. He loved her, but his love was not without condition. She yearned for him. He would accept her and love her with a passion that could consume the world, if only she were to serve him this once. The thought propelled her into motion. She crossed him, hand outstretched, fingers trembling. Suddenly, a voice arose in the deep recesses of her mind, beyond the layers that had been whited out by his influence. At first it was light and soft, as though from far away. As she walked, it became louder, as though someone was falling out of the sky right above the house. The voice was screaming. She couldn't make out who it was. It sounded so familiar, so many. She heard it. The voice belonged to her mother, to Lauren. It was Sophie screaming with her final breath. It was Daniel howling from a shallow grave. It was Ethan. It was herself. All of them shrieking, begging her to come back, screaming with all their force in protest of that unnatural unity, of that bestial marriage. She heard them and she saw that she was walking, and what she was walking to. She was entering a night blacker than her most vivid nightmares could have painted for her. But she couldn't stop, his coal black eyes beckoning her. There was nothing and no one to save her. He could not be won, could not be bested. Could he? As her hand closed around the hilt of the blade, whose glittering tip lay inches from his abdomen, she looked into his eyes. They were as gentle and naked as the world in its infancy. She smiled, and her hand ceased to tremble. Web of Shadows. Can we go on a roller coaster? Sure we can, Ethan assured his son, whose eyes brimmed with hope and enthusiasm. Little Lucas ran ahead towards the ride as his father walked quickly behind. It was one of those old, rickety coasters that wouldn't keep you from falling out unless you held on for dear life. Ethan was always too scared to ride them as a child, but as a father, it was his duty to be brave. "Hold on there, kiddo. You gotta be at least this tall to ride," proclaimed the ticket taker, thumbing towards the height requirement standee. "I am. I grew 2 whole inches this summer," Lucas boasted, then stood next to the grinning cartoon bear to prove himself. "Looks like you Jewist made it," the man said with a grin and gave a little wink to Ethan. "You two have fun." "Hooray," shouted Lucas. "Come on, Dad." Lucas grabbed the cuff of his father's coat and gleefully led him through the entrance to the ride. They climbed into a coaster car, and Ethan taught Lucas to hold on tight to the bar. He put his arm around his son, and they smiled at each other. Soon, the coaster began moving, creeping up into the sky. Ethan felt the anticipation slowly billowing inside him, Lucas giggling excitedly by his side. "This is going to be so awesome. Right, Dad?" Yeah, sure," Ethan replied, trying to seem convincing. He was having second thoughts, but it was too late for that. They were at the top now, and were about to descend. Ethan felt the terror of that brief moment before the coaster picked up speed. Then the fun began. Lucas and his father howled and laughed as the coaster went up and down and all around. No loops, of course. Ethan knew he made the right decision. It was a great bonding experience for the two of them. In his mind, he patted himself on the back. But as the ride came to an end, Ethan was hit by a wave of nausea, rushing to vomit just once into a trash can. The ticket taker looked irritated as he put his arm out to stop Lucas from exiting the ride. "Who told you could leave?" he snarled in a sinister voice. Lucas looked shocked until the boorish gentleman smiled and said, "Just kidding, little guy." Ethan ran over to protect his son from the inappropriately sarcastic man. But Lucas was fine, so he let it go. "You okay, Dad?" Lucas asked in an adorably concerned fashion. "Yeah, kiddo. I just got a little sick, that's all." "Were you scared?" "Of course not. Were you?" Lucas didn't want to answer right away. He just looked around like he didn't know he was being asked a question, so Ethan tickled him until he cried, which left him with quite the appetite. Ethan wasn't hungry after getting motion sickness, but he bought Lucas some sweet carnival bread. Lucas took a few bites and said he wasn't hungry anymore. Ethan rolled his eyes, knowing this was a common occurrence for kids. "Save it for later, okay?" Ethan requested, and Lucas wrapped up the bread and stuffed it in his knapsack. "I knew I was going to need this," he declared triumphantly. "My son, the psychic," Ethan joked, and they both chuckled. Lucas was ready for another ride, so they walked around the carnival looking for one they hadn't tried yet. "I want to go in there, Dad," Lucas hollered, running towards a spooky-looking funhouse. It had a spider motif and an equally attractive name, Spiderland Funhouse. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. "Oh God," he muttered. Ever since he was a boy, Ethan had a paralyzing fear of spiders. He hated all creepy crawlies, but the idea that spiders trap things in their webs and then slowly suck the life out of them was more than he could handle. He prayed he could get his son to change his mind. "Lucas, I don't think this is such a good idea." "What? Why not?" Lucas had nary an inkling of why his father would object to a funhouse. "It's just—" "What's wrong?" interrupted the ticket taker, who seemed just as surly as the previous one. "Afraid of spiders?" "No way," Lucas shouted defiantly. "I'm not afraid of stupid bugs." The ticket taker motioned to Ethan. "I was referring to your dad there." Ethan was a little ticked off at the employees of this particular carnival, but he tried not to show it. He turned to Lucas, who looked hopeful that his father would insist he wasn't afraid. "Of course not, but it doesn't look very safe. It looks really dark inside." "Nah, it's perfectly safe," assured the ticket taker. A group of harmless-looking teenagers walked up, wanting to go inside. "Dad, let me go in, please." "Those other kids are going in." Ethan gave in to his son's desire, but asked the group of kids if they could make sure Lucas didn't get hurt inside, to which they obliged. "You're not coming in?" Lucas asked, a little confused. "I'm probably too big," Ethan replied. "I'd just get in the way." He didn't want his son to see him squeal like a little girl if a fake spider were to pop out of nowhere. "But won't you get bored waiting?" It was just like Lucas to be concerned about other people having fun. "I'll be fine." But Lucas couldn't let his father stand around doing nothing at such an exciting place. He looked over at a tent that sat next to the funhouse. A glowing sign read, "Fortune Teller." "Look, Dad, you can get your fortune told," Lucas shouted, pointing at the tent. "Son, those things aren't real. It's just a scam." Lucas looked as if he just found out there was no Santa Claus. Ethan quickly backtracked. "I mean, the real ones wouldn't be at a cheap carnival. They're too busy helping the police solve crimes." Ethan was quite satisfied with his brilliant save. Lucas saw through his father's ruse and cleverly played on his skepticism. "Just try it, Dad. It's just for fun, right?" "Well, you do have a point. It's just for fun, so why not?" Ethan gave his son a hug and left him in the care of the harmless teens, the ticket taker, and the spider-themed funhouse. It wouldn't take very long to have his fortune told, since there was no one in line. He walked slowly towards the tent, with a strange feeling in his stomach, attributing it to the earlier motion sickness. As he pulled back the curtain and entered the tent, he knew he had made some kind of fatal mistake. I'm sorry, I changed my mind," he said, turning to leave. "Nonsense. What are you afraid of?" inquired a wispy voice from behind a round table. Ethan had been accused of being afraid several times that night. Even though the accusations were valid, he wanted to prove them wrong. I know. It's just for fun, so why be apprehensive?" "Precisely. Now sit down, and I will tell you what you need to know." Ethan reluctantly sat down at the table which, to his surprise, was absent a crystal ball. "Wondering where's my crystal ball?" the woman asked wryly. "No, I read palms," she informed him, and took his right hand into hers. Tracing the lines on his palm with her pointer finger, the fortune teller began to divine Ethan's destiny. Very interesting," she mused. "Of course. I'm an interesting guy." Ethan smirked at his charming reply, but the fortune teller paid no attention, continuing in a stern voice. "You should stop looking for what you have lost. Ethan was a little confused. As far as he knew, he hadn't lost anything. Haven't lost anything? I assure you, you have. She looked directly into Ethan's eyes, giving him a shiver. I don't remember losing anything. So how can I be looking for it? It was a perfectly logical question. I'm sorry, but that's all I can tell you. Your lines speak few words. Kent, now Ethan in our tale, had more than enough of the fortune teller's suspicious ramblings. He handed her 2 tickets and bid her farewell. The teenagers were just exiting the fun house, so Ethan trotted over to retrieve his son. However, Lucas wasn't with them. Is my son still inside? He asked them politely. Who? One of them inquired, to Ethan's surprise. My son, Ethan replied firmly. You guys are going to stay with him inside the fun house. I asked you to keep an eye on him. We've never seen you before, dude. Are you fucking kidding me? Ethan growled. You think this is funny? Is my son still inside or not? Where is he? The teens looked at each other in amazement of the stranger's sudden rudeness. Look, dude, we've never seen you before and we don't know your son, so just leave us alone. Ethan stood dumbfounded as the group strolled away, joking about how crazy he seemed. Before he could begin to wrap his brain around what had just happened, the ticket taker called to him. Hey, he shouted. Everything okay? Ethan ran up to him, assuming he would be more cooperative. My son, Lucas. He went into the fun house. Did he come out? He wasn't one of those kids, the man asked, motioning to the teenagers. No. Why would I be asking them where my son was if he was one of them? Ethan asked angrily. Hey, calm down, sir. How old was he? What are you talking about? He was about this tall. You saw him go in. You asked if I was afraid of spiders. Ethan was furious now. I have no idea what you're talking about, sir, but if your son went inside and didn't come out, just go in after him. Ethan pushed past the ticket taker, who then grabbed his arm and jerked him back. That'll be 4 tickets, please. Ethan threw his remaining tickets in the man's face, then bolted up the ramp. He stopped short, recoiling in fear. Once he noticed the entrance was through the mouth of a giant tarantula, its 8 hairy legs looming over him like a mother reaching for a child. Its red eyes looked hungry, and its white fangs looked real. Ethan was overwhelmed with anxiety, but if Lucas was in there, then he had no choice other than to go in after him. He glanced sheepishly at the ticket taker, who was facing the other way, and shuffled inside. Ethan could hardly see a thing inside the fun house, since there was just enough light to accent the artificial webs lining the walls. His heart was beating so hard it hurt. The air was thin, and the temperature felt like it was slowly rising. Lucas, he called out sporadically, his lone voice reverberating through the cold iron walls. Exploring further, Ethan thought he saw something move, but it was just his warped reflection in the funhouse mirrors. He continued cautiously past the bouncy bridge, past the moving floors, past the rope net, until he came to a spinning corridor. Ethan could see light coming from an exit at the other end, but the hypnotic effect of the lines painted on the cylinder corridor created a vertigo effect. He tried to turn back, yet had no idea where he was anymore. Lucas, he managed one last time, and fell unconscious. The sun shone through Ethan's eyelids as the chirping of birds coaxed him awake. He lay on the ground near a single tree, his body aching all over. The carnival was gone. All that remained was an empty field of dirt and scattered patches of dead grass. Lucas, Ethan whispered. Where was his son? He wanted to cry, but it was too soon. Lucas could be safe nearby. Someone must have noticed that he was alone and brought him to safety. There was a village in sight, so there could be a police station. Ethan stood up and started towards the town. As he stumbled through the field, he tried to piece together why he passed out and how the carnival could have vanished overnight. The town was small but spread out. Houses were a little run down, but charming with their white trim and pastel paint jobs. Ethan couldn't immediately see if there was a police station around, so he decided to check out the local eatery to ask where it was. As he walked through the entrance, a little bell rang, and all the patrons turned to see who was coming in. They didn't seem happy to see a tourist. Ethan wasted no time. Can someone tell me where the police station is? No one answered. In fact, everyone put down their forks and knives, their glasses, their sandwiches. They all looked at Ethan with dissatisfied eyes. Even the waitresses were staring daggers at him. I'm sorry, I just need the police. Please, Ethan said as politely as he could under the circumstances. The police, a gruff old man grumbled. You have an accident? No, my son is missing. We were at the carnival last night, and Ethan wasn't sure how to finish his sentence, but as it turned out, he didn't need to. What carnival? A waitress chimed in. The one last weekend? Last weekend? No, the one last night. But just as he said those words, Ethan realized that he didn't know how long he'd been unconscious. Sorry, son, but the only carnival around here took off 3 days ago, the gruff old man assured him. You on drugs or something? Asked a young, homely girl. You city people always on them drugs. Ethan lost his patience. Just tell me where the police station is. I need to go there right now. No one spoke. They just picked up their forks and knives, their glasses, their sandwiches, and went on with their business. A waitress finally replied, Ain't no police station here. What kind of place is this? Ethan shouted, How can you have no police station? Don't get your britches in a bunch. Mister, said the waitress. This here is a small town. We don't get many problems. If we do, we handle them ourselves. Of course you do, Ethan rebutted. Can I use a phone then? A different old man chuckled lightly before replying. Ain't had no phone service in 8 years, friend. Ethan was stunned. He stared at the old man in disbelief, then at the waitress, and then at a payphone on the wall at the back of the restaurant. Pushing the waitress aside, he marched to the phone and picked up the receiver with determination. There was no dial tone. He hung it up and hung his head in despair. No police. No phone. How could he take Lucas to a place like this? Told you so, the old man called to him. Store knocked out the power lines 8 years ago. Town don't got money to fix him. Nobody to call. Anyhow. Small town we got here. Some of the patrons nodded in agreement at the old man's sentiment. There was no concern for the outside world in this town. Perhaps there was no concern for a missing boy. Ethan walked slowly back to the front door in defeat and placed his hand on the knob. He had to make sure there really was no police station, as well as no working phones. The carnies weren't exactly trustworthy, and Ethan was hesitant to believe what he was being told. He turned around to say one last thing before leaving. If anyone sees a little boy they don't recognize, please keep him here until I come back. No one paid much attention. As Ethan turned to leave, he was accosted by a sickly, bearded man tripping through the doorway. They took her, he cried. They took her. He fell to his knees, grabbing Ethan's pant leg and looking up at him meekly. Get in the hell out of here, a voice shouted from behind counter. We've had enough of this. The man trembled as he attempted to stand, relying on Ethan's arm to pull himself up. Ethan just stood there wondering if he should shake the man off or let him continue. Soon their faces were right up close to each other. They took her, the man whispered, sending a chill through Ethan's veins. Get off him, you nut job, a large man yelled, pulling the sickly, bearded fellow off of Ethan and throwing him against the door. Now get out of here. Hold on a second, Ethan interjected. Let's just hear him out. The large man scowled at Ethan. He's crazy. There's no sense listening to him. Please help me, cried the sickly man, grabbing the front of Ethan's jacket. They won't help me. No one from this town will help me. He began shaking Ethan vigorously, forcing him to push the man away. He fell to the floor, sobbing. I don't know what's going on here, said Ethan, but my son is missing, and this man seems to be missing someone too. Let him speak. They took her, the sickly man cried once more. Shut the hell up, the large man said calmly and sternly. Who took her, and who did they take? Ethan asked. My daughter. They took my daughter. They took Amelia, cried the sickly man. Who? Ethan demanded. Who took her? The sickly man's eyes grew wide. Then he closed them tight. The patrons all paused for a moment and continued their business. Ethan waited for the man's response, but it never came. "You're wasting your time, buddy," the large man said. "He doesn't know what he's saying." Ethan knelt down and put his hand on the sickly man's shoulder. "Do you know where they took her?" Again, the man's eyes grew wide and wider still. The large man's face became cross, and the tension became thick. The sickly, bearded man spoke softly and with little strength. "Past where the river bends." Ethan stopped breathing for a moment when he heard those words. The sickly man spoke again, but with more volume and vigor. "Past where the silo stands." Some of the patrons began to grumble and mutter inaudible things. Ethan was completely entranced by the terror swirling in the sickly man's eyes. "Past where they paint the houses." "What? I don't understand," Ethan whispered. The sickly man looked directly into Ethan's eyes, his face trembling. "Past where they paint the houses. Past where they paint the houses." Ethan suddenly agreed with the locals that this man must be insane and backed away a few feet. But the man continued to stare into Ethan's eyes, repeating himself louder and louder. "Past where they paint the houses. Past where they paint the houses. Past where they paint the houses." Ethan was petrified by the sickly man's mantra. He looked around hoping someone was going to do something, but they didn't need to. The sickly man began to choke and gasp for air. In moments, he was on the floor, motionless. No one batted an eye. "Finally," sighed the large man. "Finally," Ethan shouted angrily. "That's what you say when this man seems to have had a heart attack. He was the local nut, and now he cracked. Let it go. You have a son to find, don't you?" Ethan knelt down again to check if the sickly man was breathing. His heart was beating, so Ethan propped him up into an empty booth. "This man needs medical attention." "He's fine," the large man insisted, and he and everyone else ignored Ethan for the duration of his stay at their fine eatery. Storming out the front door, Ethan resolved that the large man was right. He had a son to find. Ethan wandered through town, up and down hilly dirt roads, looking for the police station. He kept recalling the waitress's words. "Ain't no police station here." Was that really true? Occasionally, he'd find a remote cottage and ask the residents if they'd seen Lucas, but none were any help and all without phones. Discouraged by his futile search, Ethan knelt at the river's edge to rinse his face. That's when he noticed something significant. The river took a sharp turn near the horizon. "Past where the river bends," Ethan whispered. Was the sickly man insane? Or was he onto something? Ethan decided that without hope, he had nothing. The bend in the river gave him hope, so he followed it. As it got closer, he looked out at the forest and up to the mountains. A few houses were scattered here and there, but mostly it seemed that wherever he was headed would be quite a hike. He reached the river bend and sat down to mentally prepare himself for the journey, not knowing how far it would take him or where it would lead. Ethan took a picture of his wife and son from his wallet and held it tightly in his thumb and forefinger. "Maya," he said softly as he touched her face, then Lucas's, his only family. He wondered what Maya would think of him now. As he walked up the dirt road, Ethan's face was warmed by sun rays coming through the trees, his ears serenaded by birds, insects, and the movement of the river. It was almost peaceful despite the worries swarming in his mind. Would Lucas be down this path? Had he been taken, or just ran off? If so, why? He kept thinking that he may be walking away from Lucas rather than towards. But he just couldn't turn around. The sickly man's words wouldn't let him. The dirt road twisted and turned until Ethan wasn't sure which direction he was headed. A house here, and there provided no respite, as there seemed to be no one home. He was becoming exhausted due to the constant slight incline of the road, so he stopped to rest. He was just high up enough to see the village over the trees. It made him feel alone. It was then that he noticed something hanging from a branch that looked like a knapsack. Ethan walked towards a dangling bag, then jogged, then ran. He stopped just short of it, recognizing it was indeed Lucas's. Yet somehow it seemed old and worn. He grabbed the bag and looked inside. It was empty. Various questions entered Ethan's mind. but he dismissed them knowing he wouldn't have any answers until he found his son. There was no doubt anymore that Lucas had been down the same road and that Ethan was going in the right direction. That's when he noticed something else in the distance, a silo, past where the silo stands. He spoke aloud with both confidence and fear, letting out some more slack on the straps. Ethan swung Lucas's knapsack onto his back and continued hiking up the road. The sun was just above the trees, getting ready to paint the sky. Night was coming. As Ethan grew closer to the silo, a deep sense of foreboding began festering inside him. Finding Lucas was becoming a reality, and now Ethan couldn't help imagining what might happen when he finally found him. Would he have to tangle with Lucas's kidnappers? Ethan repeated the words, "I know he's alive," over and over until he no longer realized he was saying it. Ethan stopped and looked up at the silo. Time had surely forgotten this majestic tower with its cracked concrete, rusted ladder, and the last remnants of spoiled grain seeping through an open hatch. Moss and vines had gradually worked their way up over the years, as if trying to hold the cylindrical structure, prevent it from moving. It almost looked like a living creature, standing tall and wise, watching over the village. Ethan took the picture from his wallet once again and held it to his heart, taking multiple deep breaths. Just a little further, he thought, and continued his journey. The road was now a path, overgrown in some areas, making progress a little difficult. Ethan felt as though the forest was watching him, with malice, perhaps. He could tell that no one had walked this path in quite some time, which bothered him in a way he couldn't quite understand. As he traveled further, the trees gradually went from grand and full to sad and lifeless. The sunset was in full effect now, but Ethan wasn't sure he wanted to rest again just yet. He changed his mind upon spotting a building among the branches. The shack was of modest size, with scattered patches of chipped blue paint peeling off and hanging like a willow tree. It looked sturdy and seemed as though someone was keeping up with repairs. Ethan stepped lightly up the creaky porch steps and knocked on the door, simultaneously realizing that Lucas could very well be inside and that his knock could be met with violence. He took a few steps back and the door opened. A man in a dirty cap and hunting vest greeted him with a grim scowl. The two men glared at each other. Ethan could tell by the man's eyes that he was disappointed to see a stranger. He was about to slam the door without a word when Ethan finally spoke up. "I'm looking for my son." He gave his voice a tinge of aggression in an attempt to show no fear. "Have you seen a little boy?" The man looked down and sighed as he stepped out onto the porch, closing the front door behind him. "Go home," he said in a stoic tone. "Not without my son," Ethan replied, insinuating that the man standing before him might have taken Lucas. "Let it go. There's nothing you can do. Just forget about him and return to your life." Ethan grabbed him by his vest and slammed him against the door. "You're crazy if you think I'm afraid of you," he grunted into the man's face, then turned and threw him down the porch steps. He charged through the door and darted around the house, opening every cabinet and closet and flipping every table looking for his son. It didn't take long to register. There was no one else there. "I'm just trying to help you," the man insisted, appearing in the doorway. "You want to help me? Then tell me where my son is." The man sighed once more, his demeanor becoming more sympathetic. "I can't." Ethan stepped outside and sat on the porch steps, holding his head in his hands. "You know where he is, don't you?" he pleaded, hoping for a less cryptic answer. Maybe this guy didn't know where Lucas was, but he obviously knew something that he couldn't tell Ethan directly, perhaps because he was afraid. "We both know where he is, but you can't go there. If you do, you'll regret it." He sat down next to Ethan and looked him in the eyes. "Your son isn't coming back, and you won't be able to rescue him." His words were painful to hear, but they slowly settled in Ethan's mind, becoming a sort of comfortable truth. Still, he tried as hard as he could not to believe. "Wait here," the man said and walked back into the cabin, leaving Ethan alone to ponder his plight. He recalled the scenario thus far, evoking vivid, yet detached memories. The coaster, the fortune teller, the funhouse, the restaurant, the crazed man who lost his daughter. Past where they paint the houses, Ethan said without thinking. I have to keep going. I have to find him. I'll bring him back. I'll save him. With that, he stood up tall and turned around, only to discover the man had returned holding a pistol. Ethan's face turned red. You son of a bitch. I knew it, he shouted. I'm not going to shoot you, the man said, turning the gun around so the handle was facing Ethan. You might need this. Ethan reached out and accepted the gun. It felt cold, dangerous, and unfamiliar. Know how to use it? The man asked, then gave Ethan a short lesson when he didn't respond quickly enough. I don't think I can kill anyone, Ethan said as he swung the pistol around in a cumbersome manner. Don't worry. When the time comes, you'll do what you have to do. Just remember, there's only one bullet, so make it count. Ethan tried to imagine himself firing a gun as he ran his thumb over the pistol hammer. He nodded in acknowledgement, then turned his eyes to the setting sun. Can I stay here till morning? I'm sorry, the man replied with grave sincerity. You can't stay here. Ethan wondered if he should press the issue or continue on through nightfall. The man must have had his reasons for not letting Ethan stay, and he wasn't sure he wanted to know what those reasons were. The look on the man's face suggested that he probably wouldn't have a reply. Instead, he thanked the man for the gun and put it into Lucas's knapsack. The two shook hands, and Ethan's journey resumed. It was getting darker, and soon would be too dark to see. Ethan couldn't have known there would be no moon that night. Darkness wasn't a particular fear of Ethan's, but it was making him anxious knowing he was in such foreign surroundings. The sky's crimson backdrop was fading to black as Ethan came upon a small clearing. He decided to sleep there. Let's get lost in the night. The insects chirped a soothing song as Ethan drifted off to sleep, holding the picture from his wallet. Ethan felt something. It was still pitch black, so he knew he couldn't see what it was. He lay on his side, sensing a presence behind him. A hand came over his body and clutched him tight. It was Maya. Where is our son? She whispered in a labored monotone. Where is Lucas? I don't know, Ethan replied in shame. There was a long pause as he focused on Maya's warmth covering his whole body, her embrace filling him with both hope and sadness. Maya spoke again, even weaker this time. Please bring him home. The sounds of the forest drifted away until there was nothing, as if Maya had banished them. Ethan tried to speak, but the silence was so loud it bound his lips. Then, as if someone else was speaking through him, he whispered unknowingly, Promise me, the sun will rise again. Ethan awoke with a start, not having perceived he was dreaming. It was daylight, and reality was setting in once again. Lucas was gone, but could be nearby. He could feel it. It wouldn't be much longer now that they would be reunited. He was prepared to do whatever he had to. He would bring Lucas home, and no man would stop him. As Ethan looked around to see which way to go, he noticed there were multiple paths, 8 distinct paths going in all directions. He had no idea which one to take, nor which one he had taken to get there. He turned slowly in a circle, trying to decide what to do. Unable to make a decision, he fell to his knees in frustration. That's when he saw something at the entrance to the path in front of him. A trail of breadcrumbs. Lucas must have kept the carnival bread with him despite losing the knapsack. Ethan smiled at the thought of his son being brave and resourceful in the face of danger. Like father, like son, he said to the breadcrumb trail and started down the path. The trail was straight at first, but soon became full of twists and turns, unnecessarily so. Ethan was getting frustrated at the illogical way it had been made and began to just push through the brush. Eventually, the path was impossible to navigate, but he felt compelled to head in one certain direction, which eventually led to the edge of the forest where he found more scattered breadcrumbs. Mountains embraced the horizon, coddled by green fields. A winding path led down the hill from the forest to a valley where sat a seemingly deserted village. As the houses got closer, Ethan saw how dilapidated they were. The windows were filthy, the roofs slightly concave. Some houses were missing boards in the outer walls. If there was anything that stood out to Ethan, it was that none of the houses looked as though they had ever been painted. The town was laid out in a circular shape, with rows of houses revolving around one central building. There was no grass anywhere in town, dirt clouds drifting in slow motion. Time seemed to stand still. Ethan could feel Lucas nearby. It was the strongest gut feeling of his life. He clenched his fists and stepped into the village. As Ethan explored the town, he looked around for signs of life. He could sense other people, but saw none. Glancing at a house, he spotted a face behind a cracked, cloudy window. It was a little girl. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, running towards the house. The face calmly moved away from the window as he approached. "Please, I need help." Ethan vigorously jiggled the doorknob, but it was no use. He desperately banged on the door, then tried to break it down but was too weak from hunger. Slowly collapsing on the doorstep, Ethan begged the girl to acknowledge him. There only came silence in return. He rose to his feet and peered in the window. It was hard to see clearly through the filth, but there seemed to be something moving in the background. "Hey!" Ethan shouted again, banging on the glass, which broke easier than expected. He tried to climb through the window, but just couldn't manage. So he gave up and continued to stumble through the empty town. Lucas had to be in one of those houses, but which one? He wondered how many of them had children inside. As Ethan walked towards the center of the town, the dust clouds parted to reveal the central building. It was even more rundown than the rest of the village. Boards were hanging by singular nails. Windows were broken, the roof nearly caving in. Ethan didn't notice at first, but the house had an octagonal shape. He walked around it looking for a door, but there were only windows. A strange curiosity overcame him, and Ethan was compelled to look through one of the broken panes. There were slivers of light coming through cracks in the ceiling, revealing broken furniture and dead rodents. In the center, a single beam illuminated a figure sitting on a small stool. It was a little boy. "Lucas!" Ethan shouted. The boy slowly raised his head, bringing his face into the light. His eyes were swollen and his cheeks were stained with tears. His body shook and his lips quivered as he spoke. "Dad, Lucas, are you okay?" Ethan had a rush of adrenaline. He could surely climb through the window this time. "Dad," Lucas whispered sadly. "It's going to be okay, son. I'm coming." Ethan smashed the remaining glass with his fists and attempted to hoist himself up into the window. H, help me." Ethan couldn't bear to hear Lucas so frightened. It was driving him mad with concern. All this time, he wasn't even sure if he would find his son, but seeing him now was tearing his heart in every direction. "I'm coming, Lucas. I'm calm." Ethan froze at the sight of something coming into the light that shined on his son. A finger, perhaps. No, a paw. Another appeared. They were long and dark, covered in fur. Was there a wild animal threatening Lucas? A third appeared. They waved hypnotically in the air in front of Lucas's face. Then one gently caressed his cheek. A voice spoke, a hideous, slow voice, sharp and full of treble. "We luov Hyam." Every muscle in Ethan's body stiffened at once. Every hair stood up. He watched the waving appendages and listened to the horrible voices, unable to react. He eyes dear to us. "Yes, we love Hyam. We cherish Hyam." More slender, furry appendages danced into the light around Lucas. They covered him, touched him. Soon, the figures moved closer, allowing Ethan to view their previously shrouded forms. Their bodies were furry as well, the size of a large dog or wolf, but segmented and with too many legs to be a mammal. Ethan then realized what they were, his darkest fear. "Dad." Lucas managed to whimper through his intense fright. Ethan couldn't move or respond. He was paralyzed. His most horrible nightmare was standing before him, larger than he could have ever imagined. Lucas began to sob, but he had no tears left. As the creatures continued to surround Lucas, their faces finally revealed themselves. They looked almost human, almost familiar, but with eyes all over their foreheads and two large, wet fangs. Their hideous visages sent Ethan into a complete state of shock. Again, they spoke. "Want you join us? Yes, join us for diner. For diner." Suddenly, multiple bodies started to move towards Ethan. The nightmare was closing in. He snapped out of shock and fell from the window onto his back, scrambling like a cat who didn't land on their feet. Once he got his footing, he ran away as fast as he could without looking back. Ethan ran harder and faster than he ever had before. Despite being hungry and exhausted, he ran. He ran up the winding trail to the forest, through the impossible path, and to the 8-way intersection. Ethan didn't even think about which way to go. He just ran. He had no idea where he was going, but he couldn't stop. Why was he running? He couldn't remember. He just knew he had to run, and couldn't stop until he knew he was safe. Nothing looked familiar. It was all a blur. Ethan's legs moved on their own, bringing him farther and farther from that awful place. He had no idea how long he had been running when he finally spotted a building. It was the restaurant. Ethan burst through the door expecting to see a room full of people, but the place was empty. The door slowly shut behind him, leaving him alone and afraid. His knees buckled. His hands quivered. All the energy he used to run was gone, and he soon stumbled into a booth, attempting to catch his wind. The grotesque faces stared him down in his mind. Had he really left Lucas with those things? Ethan sat up and looked around. The restaurant was dark and dusty, as though no one had been there for a long time. He took the picture of his wife and son from his wallet and held it tightly in his fingers. Guilt and pain enveloped him in an almost comforting way. He was finally able to cry. As he wept, Ethan removed the knapsack from his back and hugged it like a teddy bear. But it wasn't soft like one, for there was something inside. The pistol. He recalled the man's words. "You might need this." Ethan inspected the gun in his hand, then opened the chamber. One bullet, he whispered. Was this the man's intention? Again, he recalled the stranger's words. "When the time comes, you'll do what you have to do." With tears streaming down, Ethan closed the chamber and held the gun to the side of his head. Shutting his eyes tightly, clenching his teeth, he prepared to pull the trigger. He didn't know what fate lay in store for his son, but he couldn't bear the weight of his own cowardice. Before he could end his life, the phone rang. Grinning, Ethan sat there frozen, still holding the gun to his head. Grinning, he recalled the words of the old man. Storm knocked out the power lines 8 years ago. Grinning, Ethan placed the gun on the table and slowly got up. Grinning, he walked towards the payphone in a trance. Grinning, reaching out, he felt as if the phone was pulling him closer. Grinning, Ethan reached for the payphone, his hand shaking as he picked up the receiver. There was no sound, so Ethan spoke first, his voice trembling. "They took him. They took our son." After a moment of silence came a woman's voice. "Where is Lucas? I couldn't save him. I couldn't save our son," cried Ethan in shame. It seemed like forever before the woman spoke again, this time more somber. "Please bring him home." Ethan couldn't bear to listen. Each word cut him deeper than any blade. "I couldn't save him. They took him. They took Lucas." Ethan burst into tears, more intensely than before. All his regret seemed to be coiling around him, squeezing him, suffocating him. "It's all your fault," the woman said scornfully. "You coward." "Maya," Ethan whimpered. "You don't love our son. If you did, you wouldn't let him go so easily." "Maya, please." "I'm sorry." A click was heard, then a dial tone, then nothing. Ethan dropped the receiver and fell to the floor. He couldn't save his son, and he knew he couldn't kill himself. He didn't deserve the warm, gentle embrace of death. Curling up into the fetal position, he gave up everything and completely shut down. Ethan lay motionless as a creak came from the front door. Several bodies scuttled inside and surrounded him. His vision was blurry and his body unresponsive. He could feel things grabbing him all over, then dragging him across the floor and through the doors of the restaurant. They dragged him through the streets towards the edge of town. They dragged him past where the river bends. They dragged him past where the silo stands. They dragged him past where they paint the houses. They took him home. Crimson Chamber. Ethan had gone missing in Mexico weeks ago. Clara kept getting these bizarre letters in the mail. She had assumed the first 4 envelopes she'd received in the first 4 days of the month afterward were to the wrong address, or a mistake. However, the 5th envelope contained a blank sheet of paper, with a word that would haunt her for weeks. Husband, it said. Clara felt her blood run cold. The first 4 notes had read, I will return, and your, respectively. The 6th one was ominous. Only it read, after this, Clara went online to search for how to contact the Mexican authorities. She ran into little luck. Her conversations with police and her representatives all went the same, and all led to dead ends. After the message reached, if you can correctly guess, Clara was beginning to lose it. I will return your husband only if you can correctly guess what I will do to him, was the terse message spelled out with newspaper clippings. The nature of the words being on separate sheets of paper seemed unnecessary. If this was the message the entire time. On the back of the final sheet of paper, the one reading him was a web address. http://www.analogbrowser.com. That was all she had to go on. The website was unimpressive. Nothing more than a series of images and logos, with a small link in the center. When she clicked on it, the analog browser began to download on her laptop. Along with it came a Word document. In the document was another web address, with a notable difference in the domain registry. The address was simple, u.analog. After the program finished downloading and running, the browser, reminiscent of Opera, emerged on her screen. Clara entered the address into the search bar. A red chat room appeared on her screen. Before Clara could even begin writing a message, a series of bobbing dots appeared in the text field, preceded by the words, "Username is typing." She froze. Her eyes locked on the small red box. The dots continued to hop up and down. The text, "Username is typing," remained. Seconds went by. Minutes. The world outside the glowing white square, with a red box inside of it, became discolored and grainy as Clara stared holes into her laptop, as if trying to will her husband's kidnapper into action. And still, the bobbing continued. The dots had all but replaced her very thoughts when a series of characters popped into existence. Clara wrenched her chair across the floor and dove face first into the laptop, guzzling the words on the screen, which read, "I will return your husband only if you can correctly guess what I will do to him." Clara's left eye twitched involuntarily. The text, "Username is typing," returned to the screen. The text that replaced it seconds later read, "And I cannot lie, whether you guess correctly or not." She was about to answer, but hesitated. What if he would not return Ethan? As Clara went to enter this inquiry, she hesitated again. Then that would mean he was lying about. The reality of the situation began to dawn on her. Clara didn't understand why this was happening. She thought, if he is both simultaneously lying and telling the truth, then there has to be a third option. The third option couldn't be that Ethan was the man writing the notes and had faked his own kidnapping. His car was out front. When she dropped him off at the airport, he said he'd call her when he landed, and he didn't. Furthermore, if this person, had it been possible he were Ethan, were simultaneously lying and telling the truth, then he couldn't be Ethan to begin with. That left her with an oddly terrifying answer. She wasn't really here. Ethan wasn't really there. And this situation was the result of a repressed memory. Clara went back over the events in her head, leaving the house with Ethan, driving to the airport, dropping him off, getting the call about the laptop being on, and not to look at it, seeing the red room on the browser, the argument, his second call, and then her waiting on the third call that never came. It was all bizarre, to be sure, but one thing that stood out to her upon analyzing the day's events was the Red Room. She recalled multiple times stopping to get a timestamp, but each time, she was pulled further and deeper into the horrific website. That's when it hit her. She couldn't remember what day it was. She didn't even know what time of day it was. Not even day or night. She'd imagined going back home. She'd imagined it was his business trip, not hers. She'd imagined it was his laptop, not hers. She'd imagined she was home, but she was not. She'd imagined it all, to distract her, to distract from the pain. She didn't get a good look at the room before she died, but she knew one thing. It was red. S.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.